Welcome back to our Python course, and today we will look at web scraping or working with web data, how to obtain data from HTML, from hypertext markup language. And so probably not everyone is familiar with web development, so we will need to start with what web pages consist of, right? What parts. So we'll get started with that. So again, also let's do some terminology. So we are on our day 20, web automation, right? So what's web scraping? So web harvesting or web data extraction, it is a process for extracting data from websites. Again, so we are using our program instead of using a browser. Like when I go to a page somewhere, right? If I go to some page, let's go to Wikipedia, right? I make a request, right? And I get some data back. We already used the requests library before, right? To get some JSON data, right? So that's what we are going to use our program or Python program to get some data from any web page which we are authorized to access, of course, right? You have to have some, valid reason for wanting that data, of course, right? So so web robots, basically the process is actually quite simple. We request the URL, right? Resource locator, unified, on the universal parsed response, meaning we want to make some sense of the data, right? We find the required HTML elements and their content, and then we save. And again, let's start with some guidelines. First of all, this should not be, web scraping should not be your first line of attack, so to say. You should, of course, explore whether a site resource has a JSON API, maybe has a CSV download, maybe an Excel download, maybe some other format of download which offers the data you want. And again, the main another rule of thumb is to be nice. Using a program, you can make requests to a single page even 1,000 times a second, which will, of course, overload the page, will cause you to be blocked, right? And again, of course, access publicly available data. Even better would be to respect a robot's text file, which is if you are building a web browser, web spider like Google, alternative to Google would be highly recommended. And again, there's a huge difference between scraping something and actually using it, right? If you obtain some data, if you publish it as your own, of course, that's completely different, right? So also legality, the direction, of course, is that there have been some big legal cases, especially in America, that it should be legal to scrape as long as data does not disturb, as long as your process does not disturb the normal operation of the website in question, and also that it's publicly available, right? That you are authorized to access this data, right? So basically you are just like a browser. And again, some people who say, okay, why should actually scraping, who don't like scraping, actually without scraping you wouldn't have a web as it exists. It actually was meant for that, actually, right? For exploration, like Google, Baidu, Bing, Yandex, all these web spiders, right? Which provide, you need scraping to actually provide services, right? Actually, without otherwise, it's not, the web would cease to exist as we know it, right? We can't just have walled gardens, right? So information wants to be free. But so before we start, we need to learn some basics. So let's learn some basics of HTML, right? And we'll go here, the link here, right? I will actually just click it, right? So it's by Mozilla. They develop a Firefox web browser, but actually Mozilla Developers Network is actually used by any web developer, anybody who works with web technologies, right? But the good news for you is you don't need to become a web developer to do web scraping. You just need to know some very, very basics of HTML. So again, what is HTML? Well, HTML is the basic building block of our web pages, of any web resources, right? That I would say 99% of web pages actually, have HTML, right? And basically it's a markup language. It's not a programming language, not like Python, not like JavaScript. It's basically a way of telling web browsers what kind of content you have, right? It could be extremely simple, or it could be extremely complex, right? Again, so basically you build it up on using tags, you have elements, right? And you basically give some structure to your content. So let's look at our simple example. If you have something called "my cat is grumpy," a nice sentence, right? you can say this should be a paragraph. So you enclose it using a paragraph element. This is a legal HTML, a valid HTML tag, right? Note is actually these tags are not case sensitive, but actually for us, it's for our purposes, it won't really matter, right? So yeah, but of course, best practice to use small tags. So again, let's take a look at our anatomy of our element. Let's take a little bigger, right? So something like this, right? So that's the element. That's a name of opening tag, closing tag, and the content. And of course, for web scraping purposes, we will want to concentrate on the content. So we'll need to figure out some way to get to this, right? Again, every page has HTML. Let's say I go to HTML page. I'll right click on inspect, right? I did right click. This is a Chrome browser, but it will be similar on Safari, on Mozilla, on Firefox, right? Or maybe some other browser using, maybe Edge, maybe Brave. You'll see that this consists of, this is an HTML document, right? It consists of multiple tags, right, in multiple levels, and basically multiple boxes, right? So you go through every web page, right? We can go to SheGoesTech. Let's go to this page, right? And if I, let's say, click on Women IT, inspect, right, I will also see this page, right? It also consists of these elements, right? Again, many of these actually don't have any content, right? Some do, some don't, right? So let's say if we click on Women in IT, right? It's a headline, second level headline, and you can see the content, Women in IT, right? You see that's the content here, right? So you can see how, so every web page consists of HTML underneath. Again, there are two other building blocks, CSS and JavaScript, but those, for our purposes, usually we won't have to be huge experts on them. We'll need to know some things actually about them, right? Unless you want to build your own pages, you just need to know enough to get by, right? But again, the main thing is you should realize that any web page consists of nesting of structured HTML. And again, what's HTML? It's just a text. I mean, it's just a text. So we actually have something like this. Web page consists of something like this, but a web browser can display it in a nicely, something more pleasing, in a more pleasing format. Okay, so now that's a very basics, but let's go a little bit deeper before we start scraping. So we have this, it's a markup language, right? We have our tags, right, like this, right? And again, the main thing is we can nest it. So we can nest, for example, we want to have a grumpy cat, right? We could do say that very should be emphasized, right? We say strong, right? We can of course inspect what strong means. It's a strong importance element. Basically, you're saying semantically that this is important, right? So typically, of course, strong is displayed as bold. Again, for our purposes, we don't really worry about how it's displayed. That's for CSS to decide. But what we are interested in is, of course, that actually there's some content. And again, for you, realize that there's a nesting. So paragraph, which consists of all of this content, but within it there's also a small there's a lower level, sub element, you could say, nested element, which is called, in this case it's strong. But you could have paragraph within paragraph if you wanted, actually, right? You could do quite a few things, actually. HTML is actually quite forgiving. Even something, this is wrong, by the way, this is wrong, just like closing parenthesis is wrong here too, right? Think of this paragraph as opening parenthesis and closing parenthesis, right? And this is wrong, right? This is wrong because this should be moved here. But there's this thing which sometimes trips up people, that HTML browsers are very forgiving. I would say liberal, even more liberal than Python. They will accept even really bad HTML, badly written, because it's written for original purpose was for humans to write HTML and for anybody to be able to write, right? It was supposed to be very democratic process, right? And so we kind of moved away from this a little bit, right? Not everybody makes web pages. There's nothing, but it's kind of a little bit sad that we don't make our own web pages often. But yeah, it's not that hard to learn, actually, right? So. But for our purposes, again, we need to know that this can be nested. So, because we'll often have a huge nesting hierarchy. Like, for example, the SheGoesTech page. Look at this. We have a body, which is the main content. Then you have a header class. Then you have section class, you have main class, again that's a tag, you have division, div, section, div, headline, second level headline, only then you get to the women in IT content, so like 4 or 6 levels deep, right? It's well nicely structured. Okay, so block versus inline elements, that's not important for our purposes today, right? It's for web development. Basically we have blocks, but there are also some elements might not have a closing tag, right? For example, most famous probably is the image element, right? You have image element, right? On you have a source, you have something called attributes. Notice so there's no closing because there's no point of image element. Of course, you need this where it gets the image, but you don't need the content directly. You just need the alternate text, right? And you need also where to get the picture, right? That's what you need, right? So there is actually technically, notice also this little forward slash here, right? It is not technically a requirement in HTML, since actually XML, which is like a cousin to HTML, they have same grandfather actually, something called SGML from 1980s format. Actually, they have very close syntax actually. So sometimes you want your HTML to validate as XML. That's actually quite rare, but these days. But yeah, this is requirement for XML, right? So we'll cover. Don't worry if you don't know what XML is. We'll work with XML data as well. But so once you learn HTML, XML should be pretty easy, right? So the main thing notice about this image element, not only is it self-closing, meaning it has no closing, doesn't have a closing part, right? That doesn't have a closing tag, but it has these two inside so-called attributes, right? A source attribute and alternate attribute, right? So this is how it looks, right? So you have a paragraph. You can have as many attributes as you want, well, as humanly possible, right? You can have like 100 of them actually, but they are important for us. Why are they important? Because we will be able to use them to sort of to target our needed elements, right? If you know that this element is not only a paragraph, there could be hundreds of paragraphs, but it's a class editor node. We can say we want a paragraph which is an editor node, and most likely there will not be too many of them, maybe only 10, maybe only just one. So we will be able to narrow down our search considerably, right? So it's an extra information which you don't see on a screen, right? This is what you see on a screen, right? But this is extra information well used for multiple purposes. For example, class is often used for styling, for selecting elements actually for some specific styling purpose. Maybe a background color, different font, maybe different movement, maybe some animations actually. That's handled by CSS. But for our purposes, we will be like a detectives when we do scraping. We'll need to check what kind of interesting attributes are in our content. Right, so attributes should have space, right? There should be a space, and also equality, right? And then you have a square double quotes. Again, it's quite strict. Also, it's often this is a single attribute, right? A value. It's using a dash, right? Not underscore, not like Python uses underscore. It's very common. It's not required, right? It's just it's a convention. Also, you will see that oftentimes you'll have multiple attributes. Let's check. So, okay, ID class. Let's check our class here, right? Let's check our section, right? Class. Notice this class actually has two values. Class attribute has section and also has JS vertical block, and these are both used for styling. So, in fact, sometimes you will see multiple class attributes. Multiple class attributes which has multiple values actually, right? Separated by space. But again, that's something we will explore a little bit later, right? So space between, right? Attribute name, right? Right. Again, we won't do any active. If you want, you can of course try playing around, right? A very popular element is something called anchor. Probably the most important element. Why? Because it provides links to other sites, right? And without that is one of the original purposes of the web, right? World Wide Web, right? To link link different sources of information together. So this might be important when we decide to look for some addresses to explore next, right? So for example, you might want to find all the web addresses on the page, right? So this is anchors would be the elements then which you would want. Okay, so again, you don't have to make it, you can play around, of course, if you want. On sometimes, well, there's Boolean attributes again, which means don't have a value, they either exist or don't exist. Again, and what else? Omitting quotes around attribute values sometimes, but don't worry about it. Like, that's not really, that's usually you use quotes. And yeah, you use actually, yeah, like in Python, actually it is technically double or single quotes are same. But again, right, don't mix them, of course. What else? So HTML documents actually, like I've been telling you, they consist of structured HTML. Usually there's a doc type, this is HTML5 declaration, and you say HTML tag, right? Then you have a head which is meta information, meaning something about the page, includes the title, right? But does not have the content of the actual page. Content of the page goes into the body, and then you write your paragraphs, your headlines, your divisions, your main section, your articles, and so on and so on. You might be asking how many elements are there. There are about 100, something 110, I believe, roughly. But you don't have to know them all by you know, in your head. But just know that you can find everything in here in this MDN documentation, basically, right? So this makes the information about all their pages. Don't worry about those right now. Most pages are now in HTML5 because it's been around for like around 12 years at least, right? And also, oftentimes, one thing is that white space actually is not I mean, multiple white space actually in HTML often is not used, basically, right? Right. So that's something we'll keep in mind. Okay, some special characters. There's some special characters. You sometimes see these weird looking characters. They are actually a way of escaping. It's like, remember in Python we use escaping. We use a backslash, right? In HTML you use this and symbol for some specific characters, like you know, greater or lesser than. Because why? Because it's used in tags, right? So you can't really, you need to escape it, right? And also is important, and quotes also are important, right? So you see these, now you know in your HTML, you know what they mean, right? So what else? Right, there's also some comments. We don't really care about too much about comments, right? So you have learned about the very basics of HTML. Again, I recommend going through this slowly, not maybe as fast as I do, right? Because our primary purpose is to explore how we get this information from the web. Okay, so now let's move on to actually getting some information, right? And I will go to we'll start with something easy. And I will use pandas first, right? Web scraping with pandas right here. So we will go to import pandas as PD, right? We probably have a actually requests library as well, probably, right? Since we're working with pandas. So pandas often is a good start. So let's get a Wikipedia of, let's say, Latvian cities. I had some Latvian cities. Let's do this, maybe Lithuania next, right? So URL equals, right, this, right? Okay, and I'll, you know, and of course, right, that's the URL. I can click on it, of course, right? And that's the address. So if I go in my browser, I get a list of Latvian cities and towns, right? And of course, now notice it consists of some tables. So when you need to get some information, well, you'll want to be, like I said, a little bit of like a detective and explore how it's structured. It's quite interesting task. Again, I should mention again that Wikipedia provides also access without scraping, right? That's why you don't really need to scrape, because Wikipedia actually does have different ways of accessing, even a database access. So, but still, for learning purpose, this is a good start. So let me explore this. So this looks like a table, right? So let's explore this. Inspect. So notice there is actually a table element, right? So there's a table element, right? Right, and right table, and there's a head. there's a table row, table head, right? Table row, which has a table head of this element, right? You have table row closing, table body, right? Table body, and it consists of table rows, table row, table row. And again, if you don't know what this any element means, you can just basically do this. Say table, Control N, table MDN, and you will find the table element, right? You can explore it. It represents a tabular data, right? So information presented in a two-dimensional table structure. So if your page has something like that, you might be able to use pandas to extract most of the information. So let's try it. Right, so we have our URL, right? Let's read URL with pandas, right? Yeah, as simple as possible. So, but the only thing is you will be slightly surprised. Type of df. Right, and there's no import. What's missing? LXML. Please install it. Okay, we're going to install a parser. We need a parser to install to understand our HTML page, right? Like this, right? Because again, if I went to this page with using requests, right, it would be just simple text, right? So pip install LXML, right? Yeah, okay. Pip freeze requirements. I'll update this. It's again, of course, not required, but you know, good practice to update what you need, right? So let's see again. So I'll import pandas again, and let's try to read it. URL is still good, I hope. And let's read it. I might need to restart the LXML. I hope I define right. So might need to actually restart the browser to actually need to restart the browser. Let's see if that's enough. Again, that might be not something I want to do. We'll have to continue when I restart. Maybe hopefully I don't have to install the computer, restart the computer. Let's see. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, pip list. Is there? Yeah, LXML. There's a new version out. Okay, pip version is not important that much, right? So inst pandas. Hopefully. So URL. All right. Let's see if this works, or maybe it doesn't work. Yeah, it works. Okay, it now works. Okay, so again, I need to restart. So I did need to restart. So you might need to pip install XML. Then restart your kernel, right? Restart the book, right? And run this cell again, right? So you know, right? If you get an error, right? Okay, all right. So that's but notice something interesting. We got a list. So what's going on? Well, here's the story that our cities, we have cities, towns, we have lots of towns, so we have multiple tables, right? So this might be the case. So let's check table. And now here, Control F, table. I'll do table. There's actually 7 tables. There's 7 tables we can go through. This is a city table. There is a table here for the big cities, right? There's the towns, right? Cities and towns, big and small, and there are also defunct counties and districts. As you can show this actually, right? These are the old, right? So these are actually also technically tables. They are probably not what we want. So by default, turns out, pandas. Yes, a list, right? All tables on the page, right? So we just need, we will need to know the index of table 1. Okay, so let's try this. Let's do of course if we use type, we can do of course len df, right? It's actually should be technically I should say dfs, right? It's not a right len df, right? It's not actually a data frame, it's actually multiple data frames, right? So df, right, is 7, right? Again, I will maybe better be say yes and s, right? I'll do it again. So this makes a request to the URL, right? So right list again length dfs, right? It will be 7, right? So let's try the first one. DFS 0 on. Look at this. Isn't this nice? We have the information. Doggo pills, right? Of course, it's not, might not be quite what you want, but it's a pretty good start, right? It's so pandas. If you have a nice table structure, if you click on a page and you see tables, right? Then you can use pandas to extract these tables from the web page. Very quick, right? Convenient. But as we'll see, it's not customizable. You can get some stuff, but oftentimes you have some information which is not in a table, right? Then you will need to get some heavier heavier weapons, basically. But we'll need to use request library, and we'll need to do some parsing by hand. Basically, we'll need to explore our elements by hand, and we'll use something called beautiful soup to parse on structure or data, right? But for now, this is a good start. So DFS 0 is our small cities in Latvia, right? We can save it to Excel if you want, right? Of course, right? And also DFS 1, right? Should be probably, I'll do head, right? Will be, 10 cities will be probably Ainaži, right? So these are the Latvian the townships, right? Towns, right? Again, I'm not sure if all the data is completely correct, right? So, but looks about right? Population, right? You see, again, for example, you might want to know what these references are, right? Again, so maybe you will, in your program, you would want to find where are these links, right? In here, right? Like these links here. These are actually links, right? Anchors, right? Like this is anchor, right? This mentions where it came from, Latvian statistics portal, right? That's where it came from. It has a reference, like citation, right? So you might want to have that link also in your data frame, in your data set, right? So that's something to be considered. So in our next continuation, we will explore how to get data from a web page when we don't have, when our structure is not so clear, and maybe we want some extra information, maybe we want some links, maybe something else which is not in a table. All right, so hopefully this gets you started. Now of course we can, now we could save the data frames to CSV files or Excel or whatever, right? Or any other format that the pandas supports. Okay, thank you. So we'll continue. Our next task will be right now. Next task will be to explore the HTML where there are no tables or where tables are not in format that pandas supports. Right. So all right. So thank you, and I'll see you at the lectures.